They were not lost. They were not landing. They were not warned. The crew of George 1 believed they were flying safely over open ocean when Antarctica rose out of the storm and destroyed their aircraft. 1 second of confidence, 1 second of violence. In December 1946, the United States pushed south, sending a Navy seaplane into the most hostile airspace on Earth to test a dangerous idea: that American technology could dominate even the last blank space on the map. 9 men were on board. None were explorers. They were pilots, mechanics, radio men, technicians, trained to run machines, not survive their total failure. As the storm thickened, the outside world vanished. Horizon erased, sea gone. Sky and ice fused into a single white void. Forced dangerously low, the aircraft skimmed beneath 1,000 feet, blind and committed. Inside the cockpit, one instrument ruled every decision. The altimeter insisted they were still safe. It was lying. Ice below scrambled its readings, hiding the truth that the land ahead was rising fast. The pilot questioned reality for a heartbeat. Then solid rock slammed into the fuselage, igniting thousands of gallons of fuel and ripping the plane apart mid-air. In that instant, exploration ended. 9 men hit the ice still alive. That fact alone was a miracle. The aircraft did not crash cleanly. It disintegrated. Metal, fuel, bodies, and fire scattered across the snow at nearly 200 miles an hour. 2 men were killed instantly, thrown into the propellers before they could even understand what had happened. A third would not survive the night. The rest stood stunned, bleeding, burned, breathing air so cold it felt sharp. This was not a team built for survival. It was a checklist crew. Pilots to fly, machinists to fix, radio men to talk, a navigator to calculate, a photographer to document. None of those skills mattered now. Antarctica had stripped them down to biology: heat, shelter, time. 1 man was burned so badly he could barely open his mouth. Another had a shattered spine and could not move. Every decision became brutal and immediate. Who could still walk? Who needed to be carried? Who might not last until morning? There was no rescue plan, no radio call, no backup aircraft circling overhead. Their supply ship was hundreds of miles away, and no one knew exactly where they were. The mission was over. Survival ruled everything, from now. By the time George 1 reached the Antarctic coast, the flight was already failing in slow motion. The storm had erased every natural reference the crew relied on. There was no horizon, no visible ocean, no sense of height or direction. White filled the windshield completely, turning sky and ground into the same featureless surface. The aircraft was forced lower and lower, trapped beneath thick cloud and violent wind, flying under 1,000 feet in air that offered zero margin for error. Navigation now depended entirely on instruments, and Antarctica had a way of corrupting them. The altimeter, confused by dense ice beneath the aircraft, continued to report safe altitude. It was a comforting lie. In reality, the terrain ahead was rising sharply, unseen and relentless. Inside the cockpit, tension tightened with every second. Fuel was burning fast. Ice was building on the wings. Turning back meant flying blind through the same storm that had already cornered them. Pressing forward meant trusting numbers that no longer made sense. The pilot hesitated, then made the call to abort the mission. It was the correct decision, and it came seconds too late. The mountain was already there, concealed inside the weather like a loaded weapon. George 1 never descended. Antarctica rose to meet it, and the storm swallowed the sound instantly afterwards. Impact did not feel like a crash. It felt like the world stopping. George 1 struck the mountain at full speed, slicing open its hull as if the metal were paper. More than 1,300 gallons of fuel ignited in an instant, detonating around the aircraft and tearing it apart mid-air. The force threw men, equipment, and fire across the ice, scattering the crew hundreds of feet from one another before gravity finished the job. 2 men were killed immediately, their bodies hurled into the spinning propellers without a second to react. Others hit the snow burning, bleeding, stunned, alive by chance alone. When the noise ended, silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. Smoke drifted into the storm and vanished. The plane no longer existed as a machine, only as wreckage. Sections of fuselage lay twisted and open, exposing insulation, wiring, and frozen supplies to the wind. The temperature clawed heat from skin within minutes. One man lay motionless, spine shattered. Another staggered with severe burns, his face blistered, his mouth barely able to open. Pain arrived late, dulled by shock and cold. Training collapsed. Rank meant nothing. There was no cockpit, no command, no mission to complete. There was only the immediate understanding that Antarctica had won the first exchange. If they stayed where they fell, they would die. And if they moved, they might die anyway. Survival began not with hope, but with triage. Every breath burned, every movement stole strength, and the storm closed in, indifferent, patient, waiting to see who failed next in the coming hours. 3 men never became survivors. Their deaths were fast, quiet, and unremarkable. Henderson and Lopez were gone instantly, thrown from the aircraft into the spinning propellers before pain or fear could register. There was no chance to help them, no moment for last words, only the sudden absence of 2 voices in the snow. A third man, Fred Williams, lived longer, and that made it worse. His back was broken. His face was shattered. He could not move, and in Antarctica, immobility is a sentence. The crew tried to protect him, wrapping him in a sleeping bag, building walls of wreckage against the wind, refusing to admit what they already understood. Cold does not negotiate. Hours passed. His breathing slowed. When one of the men checked on him again, Williams was asleep, and then he wasn't. There was no dramatic farewell, no heroic sacrifice. The storm simply took him. By nightfall, 6 men remained. The dead were left where they lay, already beginning the long process of preservation beneath the ice. Survival had a number, and it was smaller. Survival did not arrive as hope. It arrived as arithmetic. 6 men, minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, surrounded by wreckage, darkness, and time. The first calculation was shelter. Wind would kill them faster than hunger. They dragged a torn tunnel section of the fuselage upright, crawling inside its jagged shell like animals retreating underground. A parachute was stretched across the opening, tied down with wire and frozen knots, just enough to slow the wind and trap a thin pocket of warmth. Next came fire. Robbins found a small gas stove buried in debris, useless without fuel. He siphoned gasoline from a spare tank by mouth, coughing fumes into the cold, then coaxed a flame to life. It burned blue and fragile, but it burned. Food followed. Rations were counted, not eaten. Canned meat, soup, peanut butter, bread. 2 meals a day, barely enough to keep muscles from failing. No one ever felt full. The injured dictated everything. Frenchie's burns split and wept, his lips barely opening. The cold saved him by killing bacteria that would have finished the job. Williams could not be moved. They built a cocoon around his body and pretended it was temporary. Time stretched. Watches froze. Night never truly left. Each task became ritual. Check the shelter, melt snow, feed the stove, count the food again. Outside, the wreckage creaked and shifted under drifting snow, slowly disappearing. Inside, the men did the same calculation over and over. How long until rescue? How long until weakness became fatal? How long until one mistake ended all of it? Survival was no longer bravery. It was discipline, repeated endlessly, while Antarctica waited for them to slip. They knew rescue might never come. Radios were dead, flares useless in whiteout. Even if search planes flew overhead, the storm could erase them in seconds. The men understood a hard truth. Antarctica was not actively trying to kill them. It didn't need to. It only had to wait. Every passing hour quietly reduced their chances, turning endurance into a countdown they could feel. Time did not pass normally at the crash site. It pressed down. Hours felt heavy, stretching and compressing without pattern, marked only by pain and cold. Temperatures stayed near minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, low enough to steal heat even from still bodies. Muscles weakened, fingers stiffened, small cuts stopped bleeding, then stopped healing. Frenchie's burns never became infected, not because they were treated well, but because the cold killed anything that tried to live. That same cold dried mouths, cracked lips, and pulled moisture from lungs with every breath. Sleep came in short, dangerous pieces. Too much sleep meant not waking up. Too little meant mistakes. Hunger sharpened tempers, then dulled them. Conversations slowed. Jokes became rare and forced. Every man was counting days in his head, then counting them again, unsure if he was right. Outside the shelter, storms returned without warning, burying parts of the wreckage deeper each night, erasing landmarks they used to orient themselves. Inside, the air grew stale and damp, heavy with fuel fumes and exhaustion. The men listened for engines that never came. On one day, Frenchie said he heard a plane. He hadn't. His mind had started to reach for hope on its own. The truth was worse. Rescue attempts were being delayed by the same weather that trapped them. Time, once measured in minutes and hours, had become an enemy that attacked quietly, weakening them without a single visible strike, pushing them closer to the moment when survival would no longer be a choice. And the margin for error kept shrinking daily. On the seventh day, the storm loosened its grip just enough for search planes to launch. From the ship hundreds of miles away, crews flew a ladder pattern over endless white, trusting coordinates that were already aging into guesses. Over land, the weather closed again. Clouds sank. Fog swallowed contrast. From the ground, the survivors saw nothing. From the air, the wreckage blended perfectly with snow. At one moment, a plane passed within 12 miles. Close enough to matter, far enough to kill. No signal reached them. No flare burned through the gray. Inside the shelter, Frenchie stirred and said he could hear engines. He was wrong, and that was the cruelest part. His mind had created rescue before reality could deliver it. The search aircraft turned back, fuel ticking down, crews convinced they had missed nothing. Days followed with no sound but wind and the stove's thin flame. Hope didn't collapse all at once. It leaked away. Being almost found felt crueler than being lost, because it proved survival could hinge on distance alone, and nothing else mattered anymore. Morning came clear for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, and with it, the sound everyone feared hoping for. Engines. A rescue plane circled low, seeing the wreckage at last. It could not land. No gear, no ice runway. Instead, a message dropped onto the snow with simplicity. If you can walk, head north to the frozen lake. 10 miles. If you cannot, form a straight line and wait. The men answered by forming a circle. Everyone who could still stand would move. Frenchie could not. They strapped him to a sled and pulled him anyway. Leaving him was never discussed. The journey began immediately. Snow reached chest height in places, swallowing legs, stealing balance, turning every step into resistance. Progress slowed to inches, then yards. Wind burned faces raw, arms numbed, muscles screamed. They stopped only to rest Frenchie, never themselves. Hours passed without landmarks. Behind them, the wreckage shrank into nothing. Proof retreat was impossible. Above, the rescue plane followed, sometimes visible, sometimes gone, dropping supplies to mark a path forward. Near the end, fog rolled in again, thick and sudden, blinding both air and ground. Then the men reached a cliff, 20 feet of ice blocking the lake below. Exhaustion pressed hard enough to break judgment. Somehow, a narrow slope appeared to the left, just wide enough. One by one, they descended. At the bottom, shapes emerged from the mist. After 13 days, the walk was over at last. 6 men made it back. 3 never did. There was no victory parade, no medals waiting on the ice. Antarctica kept what it took. The bodies of Henderson, Lopez, and Williams remained buried beneath more than 300 feet of ice, perfectly preserved, slowly sinking deeper with every passing year. A camera was left behind as well. Its film, never developed, still sits somewhere in the frozen wreckage, holding images no one has ever seen. Proof that some stories end without witnesses. What happened to George I was not bad luck. It was a warning about confidence outrunning reality, about trusting instruments without questioning context, about assuming technology can replace humility. For an American audience, this story lands close to home. We are taught to believe problems can always be engineered away, that preparation guarantees control. Antarctica proves otherwise. It does not care who you are, what flag you fly, or how recently you won a war. It only waits for mistakes. The 6 survivors lived because they adapted, cooperated, and refused to abandon each other when logic said they should. That lesson still matters. If you found this story powerful, take a second to like the video, share it with someone who appreciates real survival history, and subscribe for more dark, true stories where human confidence meets unforgiving reality.